In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use the HDMIP encoder to use any HDMI input and then record it on an NVR directly to the back of the NVR. This HDMI input could be a DSLR camera, it could be another NVR, it could also be a computer. In this particular example, I'm using the HDMI output from my computer, which you'll see as I go through this guide. So the first step is going to be to log into the HDMIP encoder. Its default IP address is 192.168.1.168. You'll be prompted to log into the encoder. Its default username and password are admin and admin. Then I'm going to click OK to log into the encoder. Now, the most important thing to do on the encoder here, you're first going to want to set up any of the other additional settings that you want to set up. These settings are covered in our IP encoder overview video. So for this video, we're going to strictly focus on the system setting and then network. So since the NVRs use the 10.1.1 network scheme on the back of their PoE ports, you will want to set your encoder to the 10.1.1 subnet or network. Now keep in mind, like I mentioned previously, if you do this, then you will be unable to access the encoder from your computer any longer. So you will want to make sure you change any settings that are needed before changing its IP address. So first, I'm going to go ahead and change its IP address. For port 1, it's 65, port 2 is 66, port 3 is 67, port 4 is 68, so on and so forth. However, we can really set this anywhere between 2 and 254. So I'm going to connect it to port 1 and I'll just leave it as 65. You're going to want to make sure you check the gateway as well. The NVR's IP address for the PoE switch or internal network is 10.1.1.1. Now you need to go down to the bottom, click the apply button. It's going to say set successfully. Please restart your device. You can either unplug and reconnect your IP encoder to power, or you can click the OK button, come to the System and Reboot tab, and then click the button to reboot the encoder. While the encoder is rebooting, I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to type in the IP address of my NVR. If it's the factory default IP address, it will be 192.168.1.108. I'm going to log in to the admin user. This is the default username and password from the factory. You may be prompted to install the plugin. You will want to run through the plugin installation so you can use the web interface to view your system. In order to add the IP encoder to our NVR, we're first going to go to the Setup tab. This is the page that we'll want to be on. So after about 30 seconds to a minute, your IP encoder will have reset itself or rebooted, and you'll be able to now disconnect the Ethernet cable from your local router to the back PoE ports on your NVR. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I can no longer access my encoder because it's now plugged into my NVR, so I'm going to go ahead and close the tab. I'm still on the camera or device registration screen on my NVR. If the encoder is set up properly, you may be able to use the device search button on the NVR, and it might be able to discover the HDMIP encoder after you've connected it to your PoE switch on your NVR. If the camera doesn't show up, however, you will need to do a manual add. So if it does show up when you click device search, you can simply double click it and it'll come down here with a green status. But if it doesn't show on the device search list, you will need to click the manual add button here. First, select the manufacturer OnViv or OnViv. Type in the IP address you've set for your encoder. In this instance, I've used the first port on my NVR, which is set to 65. Here you can leave the HTTP port alone, the RTSP mode to self-adaption, and then we're just going to use the username and password for our encoder, which was admin and admin. Here you can leave the rest of these settings as default. You can either click the connect button or the OK button. What it's going to do is create a manual entry for this encoder, and as you can see, we were able to get a green status again. So again, I logged into my encoder, I set it to a compatible IP address with my NVR's network ports, built-in PoE network ports, and then I disconnected the encoder from my router and connected it to my NVR, and then was able to see the device and add the device. Now let's go to preview. Let's click the first channel that I have selected here and bring in the HDMIP encoder. As long as everything's set up correctly, I should, and I do, see the HDMI 2 output from my computer. Now what's really neat is you're going to see my mouse move from the screen that I'm on and then appear on the NVR's output. As you can see, here's the mouse. There's some slight delay because the encoder is encoding this video and then sending it to the NVR, and then the NVR has to encode the video to display it on the web browser, but it's a very slight delay. And then I can move my mouse back over here to my main monitor, and as you can see, it's pretty neat. I can actually use this HDMIP encoder to save the footage from my Windows 10 PC onto my NVR. So I could come back here to the playback screen, and I can see that I can click here for D1, come to this point in the video timeline, and then we should see the output from the Windows 10 PC. Hopefully this video gives you a decent idea of what is possible with the HDMIP encoder when you use an advanced setting. Again, you could essentially use another computer, another NVR or DVR if you want to back up those first 4 channels or whatever screen you have displayed on your recorder, or a DSLR that actually supports or has an HDMI output or a video camera. Thank you for watching.